Hi everyone, I'm Paolo Bova, one of the co-authors of the paper A Tale of Two Regulatory Markets. I've pre-recorded my talk, so I'm going to hand over to PassMe. You feel free to ask me any questions after the talk. You can also reach out to me online. Hi everyone, my talk is on regulatory markets and how institutional incentives can support them in making AI systems safer. Regulatory markets involve an environment where private organizations and other actors compete to provide regulation. Examples of a more limited form of regulatory market include the automotive industries, the legal profession where barristers are chosen, and also finance, for example, credit rating agencies. Now we know, especially for credit rating agencies, that regulatory markets can fail and can fail quite badly. However, the proposal we're talking about today has a number of differences. Clark and Hadfield, in two papers, proposed this idea of regulatory markets, which would involve the same three core sets of actors: governments, private regulators, and AI companies. However, there are a few notable differences to the regulatory markets we see today. First of all, governments will set quite clear targets for private regulators to meet, or if they want to remain licensed to regulate in future. Private regulators, in terms of accepting this responsibility, also are likely to have more powers to compel AI companies to act in accordance with their regulatory rules. So this could involve auditing or certifying products to be safe before they can be deployed, and it could also involve regulation ex ante during the development phase, if that's what these private regulators judge is most important if they want to meet government targets for risk reduction. AI companies will choose from amongst the available private regulators for their desired markets for AI, and they're going to tend to choose regulators who are more reputable and are more likely to provide a good service. We'll talk later about what incentives these actors have to act in alignment with government. For now, I'm going to focus on a couple of advantages that Clark and Hadfield identified from regulatory markets for AI safety. Firstly, this competition may encourage more investment in AI tools that might be useful for model evaluations or application audits. These two types of AI regulation may be quite useful for avoiding unexpected capabilities, or at least detecting them early and when they might fail. Governments also get to directly regulate fewer entities. That is another advantage of a regulatory market. They can save more capacity for the risks which are most important for them to pay attention to. It's also more likely that a regulatory market, due to the number of regulators, can remain independent from large and powerful AI companies. We'll talk more about that later. There is another issue when it comes to regulatory markets, which is that maybe not many regulators or organizations have the capacity to find the talent and compute necessary to regulate AI companies and provide a high quality service. In this case, we think the government will need to intervene in order to provide incentives which can allow more organizations to participate in regulating AI systems to a high quality. In our model, we consider AI companies and regulators interacting with one another, and the government chooses and sets different incentives that can encourage these regulators to be active. There are 5 variables which determine the impact of incentives on regulatory markets. The first 2 are to do with the choices that the AI companies make themselves in racing for a first mover advantage. So they can choose to be safe. However, unsafe companies have a speed advantage S over safer rivals. They do incur a risk of disaster for being unsafe. However, we're going to see that there are quite a large range of scenarios where the speed advantage encourages reckless behavior regardless. AI companies can also choose to be conditionally safe. If they observe that regulators are of a high quality, then they can choose to tailor themselves to be safe. We think that this conditional strategy is somewhat likely because AI companies tend to be large and powerful and have a large number of products that they work on simultaneously. making it more likely that they'd be able to sort of tailor their deployment decisions to what AI auditors or regulators might expect of them at the time. AI auditors, or regulators rather, have a choice of where to be high quality or low quality, depending what they can afford. And if they can afford and want to be of a high quality, then they have a detection rate pH for revealing unsafe models. When they find an unsafe model, they can slow down the unsafe firm to a speed phi, perhaps through asking for safeguards on the models, or just delaying deployment decisions outright. And phi tends to be lower than the speed of a safe firm. So it acts as a punishment, essentially, which discourages reckless behavior when they can be spotted. Lastly, we have G. This is the size of the government incentive, or in other words, the budget that governments allocate to regulators for each firm that they regulate. Now, there are two types of incentives we consider in this model. And this is because they can't directly observe the quality of regulators. So they have to base the reward on the outcomes that they see from the interaction. First, we have adversarial incentives. This is when they reward G for detecting dangerous AI systems. Vigilant incentives, on the other hand, will reward G initially, but they can claim back G whenever regulators falsely predict an AI system is safe. Now, please look at the full paper online for more details on arXiv. For now, I'm just going to show a couple of slides for the purposes of the recording, which reveal the model in more detail. Here are the parameters. These are the payoff matrices as a result of the interactions between AI regulators and companies. We've already discussed this intuitively on an earlier slide. And these are our methods from evolutionary game theory. I can briefly describe these methods. First of all, players are more likely to imitate the strategies of players who are comparatively more successful than they are over time in evolutionary game theory. And what this means is that in the long run, groups are going to be playing strategies which resist invasion by mutants playing different strategies. And these are the results that we're going to show for the rest of this talk. These are the dynamics of adversarial incentives. In this graph, we're showing a scenario where the risks are high from AI systems, but AI companies choose to be unsafe regardless. So there's clearly a pressing need for high quality regulation. This graph here shows the dynamics of strategies played by the different groups over time. And if we look at the middle and focus there, we can see that AI companies are always unsafe. That is, they play AU. Of course, when they do, adversarial incentives do encourage regulators to be of a high quality because they can gain a reward from detecting unsafe firms with that higher detection rate. Over time, and by the time next model's deployment, you might expect that these companies learn to be safe. Either they're developing a truly safe model or they're tailoring their model to be safe for the purposes of the assessment. So they're moving towards one of these blue circles. Of course, without any ability to get an adversarial incentive, we may see a reduction in funding and investment for the systems, which may encourage regulators to return to being of low quality, which of course in turn allows unsafe behavior to creep back in. Now, this might have just led to a top cycle. However, because of the sophisticated strategy that the AI companies employ, we actually see over time that we're trapped in this low quality, conditionally safe scenario where the companies are essentially always going to be producing models recklessly, so we're more likely to have those with dangerous capabilities emerge. If we extend the parameter space, we see similar results. So this compares the speed advantage and the risk of AI disaster. These are two parameters which are fairly uncertain because of the nature of technological development. And we can see that on the right-hand side, we don't have any high-quality regulation, no matter what the scenario we're in. On the left-hand side, usually companies are unsafe. This blue line is indicating the region society prefers companies to act unsafely. However, above that blue line, they would prefer that AI companies do act safely. However, we can see here that they don't do so. And this is what we call the dilemma zone. Adversarial incentives have had no effect on this dilemma zone because they haven't encouraged any high-quality auditing or regulation. The question is now, do vigilant incentives do better? The answer is they do. If we pay attention to the bottom arrow here, we can see that it's reversed strongly from, so that when AI companies are playing the sophisticated strategy, auditors and regulators prefer to be of high quality. This is because vigilant incentives reward regulators for not just having a higher detection rate, but also for matching with safe companies in the first place. Because if they can match with a safe company, they're very unlikely to falsely predict that they're safe. An unsafe model is safe. There's one other interesting reversal here. We can see that we're not always in a high quality regime, just because in this middle arrow here, we can see when AI companies are always unsafe, the risks of a false positive, even for high quality auditors and regulators, means that they can be likely to lose their incentive. And this does put pressure on these regulators to become low quality again. However, as we can see from the extended parameters space, these vigilant incentives do a great job at making sure the regulatory market minimizes risk in this dilemma zone. On the right-hand side, we can even see that the regulation is quite well targeted. Outside of the dilemma zone, there is very little high-quality regulating going on. There is still some over-regulation which may occur if the risks of disaster are low. However, in general, it's doing a great job at compromising between the two. This is an advantage that it has over, let's say, a central regulator. A central regulator doesn't have this ability to flexibly respond to this lower AI risk because of the uncertainty of technological development. This means that we see far more over-regulation occurring. Here, the change in welfare is indicated by the color, and red indicates a loss of welfare due to over-regulation, and the blue indicates a gain in welfare due to risk reduction. And we can see that vigilant incentives do a better job of balancing the two. A central regulator is better, though, at minimizing risk, so that means it can eliminate more of the dilemma zone. For this reason, you may want to have a central regulator if the risks are especially large from AI, or if you expect that there are large negative externalities from extreme risks. Now, another reason you might have a central regulator is because even if you want to have a regulatory market, in order to employ these vigilant incentives, you need to be able to detect these false positives. And a central regulator could perform that role. Now, here are key takeaways. Adversarial incentives, as we've seen, destabilize regulatory markets. Vigilant incentives encourage them and help them reduce AI risk. They're also very good at balancing risk reduction and over-regulation concerns relative to a central government regulator. However, if you're wanting to prioritize reducing externalities from very large extreme risks, you may want to give even larger incentives from vigilant incentives, and you may also want to provide a more pivotal role for a central regulator too. In any case, please remember that private regulators are going to require a vigilant government regulator to assess their performance and find false positives. In terms of future work that we're most interested in, we do want to do more modeling of the detection rate of regulators, especially for different types of AI risk. It's important that regulators are able to assess their own performance, as well as to be able to signal their own performance to make it easier to find false positives. On the other hand, we also think targeting regulation across multiple markets is important because AI innovations usually have lots of downstream consequences for the economy. And finally, we want to avoid regulatory capture. We talked briefly about this earlier, but just because we have more companies, or more regulators rather, doesn't necessarily mean we are less like that AI companies aren't able to incentivize these regulators to treat them more favorably. We think more work needs to be done to find ways to reduce the likelihood of regulatory capture. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, and I hope you have a great conference.